Room 13 of Miller's Court is asleep. The fire has nearly died, reduced to a soft red glow beneath collapsing ash. Outside, Dorset Street is silent, unusually so, for the worst street in London. A neighbour hears soft singing, a woman's voice, light, dreamy, faded but still sweet. It drifts through the thin walls, a violet from mother's grave, the last song she'll ever sing. Hours from now, that voice will be gone. The door will be broken down, and what waits inside room 13 will change the Whitechapel murders forever. But this isn't where her story begins. Her story begins much earlier, before Dorset Street, before Joseph Barnet, before the myths she spun to protect herself, before a killer found the one locked room in the East End where he could work unheard. Her name was Mary Jane Kelly, or Mary Ann Kelly, or Marie Jeanette Kelly, or Fair Emma, or any of the names she used across her short life. History calls her the final canonical victim, but Mary Jane was never a footnote, never a silhouette, never a symbol. She was human, warm, laughing, clever, and tragic in equal measure. Tonight, we tell her story with care, with respect, and with a clear-eyed look at the woman behind the mythology. Welcome back to the Eclectic and to the final chapter of our series, The Women of Whitechapel. We have walked with Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, and Catherine Eddowes. Tonight, we stand with Mary Jane Kelly, a woman whose life is the most mysterious, the most debated, and in many ways the most heartbreaking. She died behind a locked door. She lived behind many more. This series restores dignity to the women whose lives were overshadowed by a figure who never deserved the attention. Each of these women carried their own stories, their own griefs, their own loves, their own dreams. Mary Jane Kelly, the youngest, the most mythologized, and the furthest from home, deserves her truth as much as all the others. Tonight, we peel back the layers of rumour and legend to find the woman beneath. Mary Jane Kelly is the least documented of all 5 victims and the most contradicted. She told different stories to different people. She was born in Limerick, or in County Cork, or in Wales. She grew up in Ireland, or grew up in Carmarthen, or spent her childhood moving between both. Some versions of her story claim her father worked in ironworks. She came from a large Catholic family. She was educated, she was married young, she lost a child, she was widowed before she was 20. Which of these is true? Perhaps some, perhaps none. Perhaps the truth sits in the spaces between. Much of what is known about Mary Jane Kelly is from Joseph Barnet, the man she was living with prior to her murder. Mary Jane Kelly told Barnet that she was born in Limerick, Ireland, around 1863. It is unclear whether she meant the city or the county of Limerick. She told Barnet that her family moved to Wales when she was a child. The trouble is, we cannot confirm this information, nor can we deny it. Mary Jane Kelly is a bit of an enigma. Her father is supposedly an ironworker named John Kelly. There are no details given about her mother. She claimed to have 6 or 7 brothers and 1 sister. One brother, named Henry, supposedly served in the 2nd Battalion Scots Guards. To one acquaintance, Kelly claimed that her parents had disowned her. Why? No one knows. But that she remained close to her sister. To Barnet, Kelly said her family had been moderately wealthy, and her landlord confirmed that she would occasionally receive letters from someone in Ireland. When Mary Jane was about 16, in 1879, It is reported that she married a coal miner called Davies or Davis, who was killed 3 years later in a mining accident. Without any means of financial support, Kelly moved to Cardiff and lived with a cousin. There is no official documentation to show Kelly's presence in Cardiff. It is at this point that people believe Kelly started to begin working as a sex worker. She may even have been introduced to this profession by her cousin. We can see here that whatever the real story is, her life is complicated, fractured. These aren't lies, they are survival stories. Mary Jane learned early that to be a woman alone in Victorian Britain, you shaped yourself into whatever kept you alive. Mary Jane likely arrived in London around 1884, age 20 or 21. She briefly worked for a tobacconist in Chelsea before securing work as a domestic servant while lodging in Crispin Street, Spitalfields. The following year, it is believed that Kelly relocated to central London. It is at this point, via her acquaintance with a young Frenchwoman, that Mary Jane found work as a sex worker, but not in the East End. London had tiers of prostitution, and Mary Jane, young and strikingly attractive, entered the higher end of the trade. She found work in a high-class brothel in the affluent West End. She became one of the brothel's most popular girls. She entertained wealthier clients. She rode in a carriage, something few working-class women ever touched. It is reported that she was invited to France by a client named Francis Craig, but returned to England after 2 weeks. She is said to have disliked her life there, but it is possible that whilst there, she realised that she was in danger of being trafficked. Women from Britain were tricked into going to France and promised a life of luxury as a mistress, but these were often lies and women were kept as slaves, monitored at all times, only allowed out at certain times of the day. They couldn't meet in groups or loiter near doorways, and as the majority could not speak French, they couldn't ask for help from the police. It was a life that was often sold to these women. It is whilst in France, Mary Jane began using the name Marie Jeanette, which she continued to use in London. Is it all true? Possibly. Her beauty was frequently mentioned. Even her landlord said she was a very quiet, decent girl when sober. But Mary Jane also drank heavily, a reoccurring theme in her life. Alcohol softened reality. It also blurred truth and fiction. Mary Jane's life had many versions, but all of them point to a woman searching for safety and stability and failing to find it. By 1885, Mary Jane's fortunes had collapsed. We don't know why. A violent client, a brothel closure, addiction, a fallout with madams, a need to disappear, perhaps fear of being discovered after having left France so quickly. What we do know is this. Mary Jane Kelly, once living among gaslit parlours and wealthier men, reappeared in Spitalfields, lodging in cheap rooms and navigating the same brutal conditions as thousands of other women. She drank more heavily. She fell behind on rent. She worked sporadically. But unlike some of the other victims, Mary Jane didn't always live hand to mouth. When sober, she was described as good-tempered, generous, well-spoken, musical, fond of singing Irish songs. This was a woman who still carried pieces of the girl she once was. And then she met Joseph Barnett. Mary Jane Kelly met Joseph Barnett on the 8th of April 1887 on Commercial Street and went for a drink, agreeing to meet the next day. Joseph was a fish porter at Billingsgate Fish Market and a part-time labourer on the docks. He was a quiet and earnest man, and he instantly became besotted with her. He didn't have much, but he had stability, and he offered it freely. After their second meet-up, they decided to move in together. Joseph adored her. He tried to support her, encourage her, care for her. He wanted to lift her out of the streets. And for a while, she let him. They took lodgings in George Street, just off Commercial Street. Later, they moved to Little Paternoster Road, off Dorset Street. Sadly, they are evicted from here for not paying rent and being drunk. In February or March of 1888, they settle into the small, cramped room behind 26 Dorset Street, known as 13 Miller's Court. Rent was 4 shillings and 6pence a week, a luxury by Whitechapel standards. And there, for a time, Mary Jane lived a quieter life, a warmer life, a life with someone who truly loved her. Neighbours said she seemed happy with Joe. They were comfortable together. She was a good-hearted girl. But beneath that fragile peace, deeper struggles stirred. Joseph Barnett lost his job in July of 1888. Reports say it was due to committing theft. As a result, Mary Jane resorted to going back to sex work. Mary Jane had 2 great enemies, poverty and the bottle. When sober, she was gentle, soft-spoken, quiet. When drinking, she could be fiery, impulsive, emotional and aggressive, and alcohol was becoming her refuge. Arguments grew between them. Weeks of tension simmered. They fought about money, about Mary Jane's drinking, and his, about her friends, especially the women who visited her room seeking warmth or company. On the 30th of October, 1888, everything burst open. A quarrel over one of Mary Jane's female friends, Maria Harvey, escalated into shouting. Barnett did not like the idea of Mary Jane allowing other sex workers to stay in the room. A window pane was smashed accidentally in anger, Barnett claimed, but the sound marked the fracture of their home. That window was never repaired. Mary Jane lost her keys to the room too, and she used to unlock the door via that broken window. Joseph left. He moved out of room 13 and found lodgings at Buller's boarding house on New Street, Bishopgate. And Mary Jane Kelly? 25 years old and spiralling. But heartbreak did not distance them emotionally. Joseph still visited her. He gave her what money he had. He still cared. He still checked in. He saw her the night before she died, and the memory of that final goodbye would haunt him for the rest of his life. Miller's Court was a narrow, dead end off Dorset Street, a cluster of small, bleak rooms facing a central courtyard. Mary Jane was known there, not for violence or vice, but for her singing. She sang Irish songs late into the night, her voice drifting through thin walls, giving others moments of escape. Neighbours described her as pleasant when sober, a good soul, very kind to those who were worse off than herself, beautiful with fair hair. But they also said she was troubled. Her drinking increased after Barnett left. Her rent was in arrears. Her mood swung sharply. One witness later recalled, when she drank, you could see sorrow in her eyes. Mary Jane asked multiple friends to stay with her in the days before her death. Perhaps this was a sign of deep loneliness, or perhaps fear. The whole of Whitechapel was on tenterhooks the entire time, due to the Ripper. On November the 8th, the night before she died, she was seen with several clients. She was seen drinking heavily. She was heard singing late into the night. Something was changing inside her. November the 8th, 1888. Mary Jane Kelly woke in room 13 of Miller's Court, hungry and exhausted. She had almost no money. Her rent, 29 shillings, was long overdue. Her fireplace barely burned. Her clothes were thin for the cold. As with most of the history of Mary Jane Kelly, there are lots of contradictions and supposed sightings of her in the last 24 hours of her life. There is a report stating that she was seen on the 8th of November in the 10 Bells pub drinking with Elizabeth Foster. Another report states that Mary was seen drinking with a man in the Britannia and appeared very drunk. The following narrative is a breakdown of what we can say that took place, with the caveat that, again, we are reliant on lots of different sightings. Between the hours of 7 p.m. to 8 p.m, Joseph Barnett made his daily visit to see Mary Jane. When he arrived, he found her in the company of Maria Harvey. Barnett did not stay for long. He apologised to Mary for having no money to give her this time. He and Maria Harvey left 13 Miller's Court at about the same time. Barnett returned to his lodgings, where he played a game called whist with other residents in the property, late into the night. Shortly before Barnett and Maria left Mary, Lizzie Albrook, who lived at 2 Miller's Court, also visited Mary. She later recalled that Mary was sober, and one of the last things she said to Lizzie was, "Whatever you do, don't you do wrong and turn out as I have." Albrook also stated that Kelly was heartily sick of the life she was leading and wished to return to Ireland. It's heartbreaking to think that the opportunity of returning to Ireland was taken away in such a cruel way. 11:45 p.m. First man. Witness Mary Ann Cox, a widower and fellow sex worker who lived at 5 Miller's Court, saw Mary Jane returning to her room with a man described as stout, aged about 35 or 36, 5'5", shabbily dressed in a long overcoat and carrying a quart of beer. He wore a billycock hat, had a blotchy face with small side whiskers and a carroty moustache. Mary Jane sees Cox and says, "I'm going to have a song." This man has never been identified. Cox later recalled she was singing, quite loudly, a violet from Mother's grave. She sang it over and over. After this encounter, Cox left the lodgings at about midnight and did not return until 1 a.m. 1 a.m, singing continues. When Cox returned home, she heard Mary Jane still singing. We can only assume the man she had gone home with was still there, listening to her. 1:30 a.m. Elizabeth Prater, who lived in the room above Kelly, heard Kelly singing stop at about 1:30 a.m. This would be the last time her voice was ever heard. 2 a.m. The court falls silent. By now the singing had stopped. No footsteps, no conversation. Mary Jane's room was dark. Between 2 and 4 a.m, the killer enters. Miller's Court was a perfect hunting ground, a narrow dead end, a room with its own entrance, a drunken victim. Once Mary Jane retreated inside, she became isolated from the world. No one knows precisely when the killer entered, but we know he had time, more time than with any other victim, and he used it. At about 4 a.m, Elizabeth Prater, having been awoken by her kitten, heard a cry of "Murder!" But as these cries were common in the East End, she did not react. No one moved. There is one final possible sighting of Mary Jane, unverified but widely discussed. At around 2:30 a.m, George Hutchinson, a resident of the Victoria Working Men's Home on Commercial Street, had returned from Romford, claimed he saw Mary Jane. She asked Hutchinson if he could lend her sixpence, but he couldn't as he'd spent all his money going down to Romford. Kelly replied, "Good morning, I must go and find some money." Kelly walks in the direction of Thrall Street. Hutchinson sees her meet a man that Hutchin was suspicious of. He described the man as having a pale complexion, a slight moustache. This was later changed to dark moustache in the press. He had dark hair, dark eyes with bushy eyebrows, aged about 35 to 36, 5'6" or 5'7" in height, carrying a small parcel. Some believe Hutchinson, some do not. His detailed description bordered on improbable for the lighting conditions, and he only came forward after the murder. But if true, this would place Mary Jane with a wealthy client, a sharp departure from her usual clientele that night. Regardless of the man's identity, Mary Jane returned to her room. The door closed, and no one saw her alive again. Between 3 and 4 a.m., the world outside room 13 was quiet. A vendor passed by. A resident coughed in a neighbouring room. A constable walked down Dorset Street and saw no movement. Inside Mary Jane's room, the fire glowed against the walls. Her clothes, later found burned, were being fed into the flames, it is believed, to create more light. This detail is chilling. The killer needed light. He made light. He stayed long enough to burn almost everything she owned. This was not hurried, not rushed, not interrupted. The door remained closed, the windows curtained, the court silent. Only one person exited room 13 that night, and it wasn't Mary Jane. November the 9th, 1888. A bitterly cold and foggy morning. At 10:45 a.m, Thomas Bower, rent collector for Mary Jane's landlord John McCarthy, approached room 13. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, harder. Still nothing. He tried the door handle. The door was locked. Through the broken window pane, the one smashed during her argument with Joseph Barnett, he reached up and pulled aside the muslin curtain and froze. The room was still, silent, red. What he saw was so horrific, he staggered back, whispering, "For God's sake, come at once." He ran back to McCarthy's shop, trembling. Within minutes, word began to spread. A large crowd gathered in the immediate vicinity of Miller Court, faces pale, voices hushed. This murder was not like the others, not performed in the dark of an alley, not hurried, not rushed. This was deliberate, extended, hidden. Room 13 had given the killer something he had never had before. Time. When police forced open the door, they found Mary Jane Kelly lying on the bed, almost unrecognisable. Her throat had been cut, like the others, but her body was mutilated extensively, far beyond what had been done to the others. Kelly was found in the middle of the bed that sat flush against the wall. She was inclined slightly to the left side of the bed, and her head was resting on her left cheek. Her right arm had been partially disconnected from the torso. Her legs were spread wide and placed at right angles. The whole of the surface of her abdomen and thighs was removed and the abdominal cavity emptied of its viscera. The breasts had been cut off, the arms mutilated by several jagged wounds, and the face mutilated beyond recognition. The tissues of the neck were severed, all round to the bone. I will not go into any more detail of the injuries, as it is far more graphic than any of the others. Mary Jane suffered in a way none of us can imagine. Some of her clothes had been burned in the fireplace, likely by the killer for light. Furniture was disturbed. It was also found that she had neatly folded the clothes she'd been wearing that day on a chair, and her boots were sat in front of the fireplace. Dr. Thomas Bond and Dr. George Bagster Phillips, who conducted the post-mortem, noted that the injuries suggested privacy, light, time, and a killer who did not fear discovery. This was the only Ripper murder committed indoors, the only one that allowed extended silence, the only one that gave him the opportunity to work without interruption. Mary Jane Kelly endured far more than the others, because the killer had the time and the privacy to inflict it. But that violence is not who she was. It is not how she died, not how she lived. And we hold her humanity first. Mary Jane's murder shattered the Metropolitan Police. Detectives were overwhelmed. Her room, unlike the alleyway scenes, was filled with traces of life, clothing, bottles, furniture, ashes, meals long uneaten. They attempted to reconstruct her final hours, but witnesses contradicted each other. Some said they heard a cry, some said they saw a man, some claimed to have spoken to her the next morning, almost certainly mistaken. The door was locked, or perhaps latched, or perhaps Joseph's key had been lost weeks before. Every detail twisted into uncertainty. The press ran wild. People panicked. Theories multiplied. For some, Mary Jane's murder meant the killer was escalating. For others, it meant he was finished. Because after November the 9th, 1888, Jack the Ripper never killed again. At least not in Whitechapel. And certainly not in a way the world recognises. Mary Jane Kelly was buried on November the 19th, 1888, in St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery in Leytonstone. Her funeral was well attended. Neighbours came, Joseph Barnett came, police officers came, even strangers came, moved by the tragedy of the youngest victim. Her coffin was inscribed simply, Marie Jeanette Kelly, aged 25 years. Unlike Catherine Eddowes or Annie Chapman, Mary Jane's grave still exists, though the exact site is now part of a mass plot. A modern marker stands there today, placed by people who wanted her name to be remembered. It reads, "In loving memory of Marie Jeanette Kelly, none but the lonely hearts can know my sadness. Love lives forever." A name claimed, a place held, a life honoured. Mary Jane Kelly has become the most mythologised of all the victims. Some see her as a tragic romantic figure. Some see her as a mystery. Some see her as the killer's final victory. But to understand Mary Jane is to understand something quietly devastating. She spent her life trying to be safe. She reinvented herself again and again. Irish, Welsh, Parisian, widow, orphan, singer, daughter of a foreman, lover to men of means, friend to the poor. She shifted her identity not to deceive, but to survive. And she survived far longer than her circumstances predicted. Mary Jane Kelly's death was horrific, but her life, her humour, her singing, her resilience, her attempts to hold on to beauty while surrounded by poverty, is what deserves to be remembered. She was not a myth, not a symbol, not the final act of a murderous story. She was a woman, a young woman, a human being, loved by some, missed by many. And she mattered. And so we come to the end of this journey, a journey through lives too often overshadowed by the man who stole them. Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, Mary Jane Kelly. 5 women, 5 lives marked by hardship, survival, resilience, and depth far beyond the headlines of 1888. They lived in a world that gave them few chances, few protections, and few places to rest. But they were not forgotten. Not here, not by us, not anymore. Their killer became a legend, but they became human again. Thank you for walking with me through their stories, for listening with compassion, for remembering these women not as victims, but as people. And as we close the series, remember this: violence creates fear, but remembrance creates dignity. I'm your host, and this has been the Women of Whitechapel on the Eclectic. Until next time, stay curious, stay compassionate, and as always, stay eclectic.